Hello and welcome to Section 1 of Chapter 21 of the American Pageant for U.S. history, the furnace of Civil War. We've been building up to the Civil War for a while. It seems like we had a whole unit, Causes of the Civil War. Some people think that the first cause of the Civil War was the foundation of the United States and the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the Bill of Rights, while conversely having slavery. It's a contradiction. It's an oxymoron. So let's get into it today. We're covering Bull Run through the war at sea. Before we get into the Bull Run, we're going to talk about kind of the aims and the strategies, kind of review what's going on. The North, their plan is to preserve the Union. Their goal is to preserve the Union. And so initially the plan is to slowly suffocate the South by blockading the coast. Virtually the entire Navy stays loyal to the North. And so they use that to blockade the South so they can't trade for essential goods and services. The South is really lacking in factories and production. It's an agrarian-based economy. And so that's kind of try to starve them out. They're also going to try to cut down the shipping within the South by controlling the Mississippi River. They always say cutting it in half. I always say it's cutting it in a third. But most of the goods, about half of the goods of the South flowed out of the Mississippi River through the network of rivers that attached to it. And then finally, they wanted to capture the capital at Richmond. Initially, the Confederacy's capital was Montgomery, Alabama, but when Virginia joined the South, they seceded in the spring of 1861. They moved the capital to Richmond, which was only about 100 miles away from Washington, D.C. And so this is the plan of Winfield Scott, who's the general in charge of all the Union armies, or kind of the head of all this. He could not lead his troops into battle, though. He was too fat to mount his horse. Pretty old. I mean, he served in the Mexican-American War. Later, as the war progresses, the aims and strategies, the aims to preserve the Union is the same, but it's also they add to end slavery. And the strategies change. Grant, when he takes over in 1864, decides that they're going to try to engage the army or the enemy anywhere they can and grind it into submission using the numerical superiority of the North. They have about 21 million. The South has about 9 million. They're going to basically engage them. And even if it's a draw or even a loss for the North, by simply fighting them over and over again, even though both sides are going to incur lots of casualties, killed, wounded, missing in action, eventually the South will run out of men. And then also they're going to liberate slaves to undermine the economic foundation of the South. And then when William Tecumseh Sherman cuts through the South, takes Atlanta, they're going to dismember the Confederacy. They're going to declare basically total war on the entire population of the South by sending troops through Georgia, up through the Carolinas, and cutting a pretty wide mile path of destruction. In the South, their goal is to win recognition. They're going to fight a defensive strategy. They, just like the American Revolution, want to gain allies, mainly from Britain and France. They just want recognition and aid. We learned from previous chapters, chapter 20, about cotton diplomacy, which largely failed. They tried to withhold cotton exports to these countries in hopes that it would blackmail them into aiding them and recognize them. It didn't work. They got their cotton from elsewhere, from India, from Egypt. And so they kind of shot themselves in the foot. They did invade the North sometimes, but usually it was a colossal failure, especially Antietam and Gettysburg. So let's get into it. After Fort Sumter, fired upon April 12, 1861, off the coast of South Carolina, the South had officially opened up the war. It was the first shots, the first volley of the war. Ironically, the first battle, there was no casualties. Lincoln calls for 75,000 troops to serve for 90 days. He thinks this is going to be a short war. Most people on both sides, the North and the South, think it's going to be a short war, just a few months. He declared, and he's very delicate with this, that there was no purpose indirectly or directly and indirectly to interfere with slavery in the states where it exists. And this is where people get confused today when they claim that the war didn't start over slavery. They claim it was states' rights. Technically, yeah, you can go that way, but it's states' rights to what? What right are they fighting for? The right to own slaves. But initially, because there are slave states that remain loyal to the North, Lincoln can't declare that this war is about slavery, even though everyone knows the underlying cause is slavery. And so it's a little confusing. I'll show you a map here in a second and kind of explains it. When Lincoln calls on those volunteers, he loses 4 more states. Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas secede. They were on the fence, and they secede and join the South. So that brings the total from 7 to 11 states. that seceded from the Union and were in open rebellion against the United States government. So this is the map I'm talking about. This is the map in around 1861. The dark red here are the 7 initial states that seceded from the Union. South Carolina being first on December 20th, 1860. And then these light red ones here are kind of orangey colors. They're the ones that seceded after Lincoln called on 75,000 troops to volunteer. The blue states are the loyal northern states. Kansas was added as a state in 1861 with all that bleeding Kansas stuff, but without these southern senators to block it, they accepted the free government of Kansas. These yellow states are the key ones. Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware are slave states that remain loyal to the North. And strategically speaking, Kentucky was vital, but Maryland as well. Lincoln had to tread lightly. Those were strategically very, very important. They were critical, and so by declaring the war was to end slavery, he would lose those states. Maryland in particular is a big problem because D.C., the District of Columbia, where our nation's capital is, Washington, is actually between Maryland and Virginia here. And so if Maryland seceded, then Washington, D.C. would be seemingly surrounded by an enemy nation. One little thing to note, if you kind of look at Virginia here, I'm wondering why it looks a little strange. In 1863, 37 western counties of Virginia seceded from Virginia and joined the North. We know it today as West Virginia. So this is a picture of Lincoln when he was elected. That's President-elect Lincoln. It's remarkable. He looks pretty young there. We'll look at pictures later in the chapter at the very end of his life, how much the war aged him. This is the American flag at the time of the Civil War. Lincoln refused to take any stars off, even though there was 11 states in rebellion. And then this is the initial Confederate States of America flag. Not the old stars and bars, the General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard you think it is. That was a battle flag. And so you get all these states contributing troops. And so you have the North versus the South. The North was dressed in their blues, often called Billy Yank, or the Union, or the Grand Old Army. And then you have the South, who were Johnny Reb, or the Grays. But some units had their own uniforms. These are New York uniforms. They're called the Zouaves. They're modeled after French troops who fought in North Africa. Imagine going into battle in the Civil War dressed like, I don't know, one of Santa's elves or an extra in the movie Aladdin. I'm not sure. This is a actual flag from the Smithsonian of the Confederacy. It's kind of weird it only has 8 stars there. I'm not sure what's going on. And here's a painting of the Zouaves marching down the streets of Washington, D.C. So the first battle, Lincoln decides to attack a small Confederate force at Bull Run. When you study the Civil War, it's a little bit confusing because most battles have 2 names. There's the Northern Battle, which was usually after geographic features like Bull Run Creek. And then there's the Southern name, which are usually named after towns that are nearby. So this is the Battle of Bull Run in the north, and the south is the Battle of Manassas Junction. If successful, the victory would show the superiority of the Union, and it might lead to the capture of Richmond. So they thought they'd go out, march out from D.C., meet the Southern Army in Virginia, destroy them, and then go take their capital, war over. So the Battle of Manassas Junction, or Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run, happened July 21st, 1861. And it's weird. People from Washington, D.C. decided this was like a Saturday. Let's go out and watch the battle. Let's go have a picnic. I have a splendid idea. Let's go out and have a picnic, watch the battle. And they're like, oh, and then we'll pack evening gowns. And so if we win, we'll have a celebration ball at Richmond tonight. People actually did this. And it was going according to plan. The North was winning the battle, and they were kind of wiping the field off of the Southern troops, except for one unit. The Virginia cavalry, led by Thomas Jackson. Other commanders said, my goodness, come on, man, fight. Let's hold like Jackson's units. They're holding like a stone wall. And so the name stuck. One of the greatest nicknames in history, Stonewall Jackson. And so they kind of consolidate on that position and then attack, launch a huge counterattack, and they unleash the first of thousands of rebel yells, which maybe makes you think of Billy Idol and with a rebel yell. Rah! It's not what you think. So it led to this huge counteroffensive. Northern troops didn't know what to do. They ran away. They skedaddled, as it was called. They ran into the picnickers. The civilians were caught in the middle of the battle. It's a melee, but both sides are so disorganized they don't know how to pursue them and mop them up, and so they just celebrate. And both sides decide, oh my gosh, we need to go like practice and figure out how to actually fight, not just run in with guns. And so this initial Southern victory leads to the idea that this is going to be a long, drawn-out war. Lincoln appoints George B. McClellan, Little Napoleon, to train this newly formed Army of the Potomac. They need discipline, they need regiment, and so that is his job. Lincoln also calls for 1 million troops to serve for 3 years. This is much different than 75,000 troops for 90 days. That's what that first Battle of Bull Run did. It was a Southern victory, and it kind of showed this is going to be a long war. Here's a painting from Bull Run and the Zouaves fighting here. You can go to Bull Run or Manassas Junction. This is what the battlefield looks like. We've toured it. This was a old house that was used as a field hospital for the South. Some of the battlefields, I mean, they're huge, these Civil War battlefields. This is Bull Run Creek here. And then here, this is an old YouTube video where this is the 75th anniversary of Gettysburg, and they launch a rebel yell. That's it. Not what you think it is. Here it is, amplified with thousands by computers. It's like an attack of a flock of seagulls. This is a picture here of the preparing for battle. This is 69th New York, predominantly an Irish unit. This is before Manassas. They were having mass, and so these were men having mass, and oftentimes before battle they would get their last rites. So McClellan, he trained the army for months. He was really good at training the army. He was a great practice coach, and so they drilled and they did parades, and this guy is a celebrity. People want to hang out with him. He's invited to all the dinners in D.C. He's living in a fabulous house. Why would you want to, take this army that you've trained and made so beautiful and wreck it? Why would you want to leave the comforts of Washington, D.C. and have dinner parties and galas and balls in your honor and people want to talk to you? The Union, after months and months of prodding, Lincoln keeps going, hey, you ready? Let's go. And hey, come on. At one point, he goes to McClellan's house. Lincoln does himself. And McClellan, basically, he knocks on the door and he says, hey, the president's here to see you. He's like, I don't want to see that buffoon, that orangutan. He calls him an orangutan and refuses to see the president. When asked about it, Lincoln said, he's a great man. I would gladly hold his horse for him. I'm standing beside him. After 9 months have elapsed since Bull Run till finally he decides to do something. He launches this Peninsular Campaign where they're going to load every man, all the guns, all the cannons, all the horse on ships and go down the Potomac River, down the Chesapeake Bay, and then launch an attack on Richmond coming from the southwest direction, moving northeast. This takes too long. There's spies in D.C. They know it's coming. This is all in the spring of 1862. McClellan is too cautious. He has numerical superiority. And so, they did a lot of things. The South, they had, fake cannons. They basically chopped down trees and painted them black. They used dummy soldiers, like stuffed versions. But even though he has numerical superiority, he's always scared to attack. He also doesn't have reinforcements because Stonewall Jackson prevents reinforcements from his famed Shenandoah campaign. Military historians slobber over themselves, oh, Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah campaign, it's so beautiful. Whatever. He also had poor intelligence. Pinkerton Detectives was the guy that helped McClellan a lot. He always inflated the numbers, and so McClellan always thought he was outnumbered. At the 7 days battle, Robert E. Lee and J.E.B. Stuart, or Jeb Stuart, drove the Yankees back and they kept fighting. McClellan, not renewing the attack, not understanding the numerical superiority of the North, decides, it didn't work. Let's go load up on the boats and go back to D.C. So in the North, there's a lot of gloom. There's calls for more volunteers, a slow response. McClellan refuses to renew the attacks. He goes back to D.C. Then General Pope loses Stonewall Jackson at the Second Battle of Bull Run in August 1862, and the North is kind of open for invasion. D.C. is too heavily fortified to attack, and so General Lee decides to invade the North to deliver a knockout blow and hopefully get recognition from Britain and France. Lee is only 20 miles from D.C. at this point. So this Peninsular Campaign, so what I'm talking about is if you look here, D.C., they put everything on boats, they sail down the Potomac, down the Chesapeake Bay, they land here, basically where Yorktown was, and then attack this direction. The problem is if you don't do well and you have to retreat, you retreat to the sea, and then you have to go back on the boats. Whereas if you march overland this way, following my arrow, and you lose, you can just retreat, and there's still lots of things to protect the north. Lots of men. It's just a disaster. Here's a painting. What is this one called? Civil War scene. It's Williamsburg, Virginia, 1862. At sea, things are going a lot better for the North. The Northern Sea blockades were concentrated on the South's main ports. To overcome the strong blockades, fast ships were developed to run through them. They're called blockade runners. These ships made a profit by exchanging cargoes for arms, for cotton and other supplies. If you've ever seen or read the book Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler is a blockade runner. He makes a fortune doing that. He's very daring. He's also kind of the basis of Han Solo and Star Wars. In 1862, the only naval battle really of note is the Confederates created the Merrimac. They got this U.S. Navy ship, and they put metal on it, like saying it like I'm from Britain, metal, and rechristened it the Virginia. So it was an old U.S. wooden ship that was plated with metal armor. It threatened blockades because nothing can touch it. And so it could crush these Union wooden ships. On March 9th, 1862, the Union launches their own ironclad, the Monitor, and so they fight these two ironclad ships, and they just shoot each other, and the bullets and the cannons just ping, 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 ping. It'd be like wearing, I don't know, an Iron Man suit and then shooting each other with a BB gun. And really, it's just a draw. It's a standstill. It's not that big a deal. It doesn't really change the course of the Civil War, but it's a preview of things to come. This is kind of a glimpse of the future of warfare. Modern naval warfare are these ironclad ships, which is just crazy. You can get metal to float. I mean, thank you, buoyancy. Yeah, buoyancy. That's all I have today. Let me know if you have any questions. Hope you enjoyed this.